without wasting too much of our time, we'll move straight into the second session. The topic of our second session is the prospects of Nigerian youths, the process of youth and women in Nigerian contemporary politics. And our second speaker is right with us here. And so I'll do the introduction. I'll introduce her, and she'll take over the presentation. Then we'll move on from there. Okay. So I'll be introducing, reading the citation of our second speaker. Irene Pogoson is a professor in the Department of Political Science, University of Ibadan. She holds a BA honor degree in history from the University of Ibadan, from where she obtained a master's and doctoral degrees. She also attended the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and the Frederick Ebert Steinfeld Fest, New York, United States of America, Full Academic for Young International Policy Analysis. She is the first female lecturer in the history of the Department of Political Science, University of Ibadan. Before joining the University of Ibadan in 2000, she worked as a research fellow and / administrative secretary with the Presidential Panel on Nigeria since Independence History Project. Between 2005 and 2007, Professor Pogoson served as a policy analyst on governance within Independent Policy Group, Abuja, a policy think tank for President Olusegun Obasanjo. Professor Pogoson is a member of a number of learned societies and organizations, including the African Political Science, AAPS, Nigerian Political Science Association, NPSA, Nigerian Society of International Affairs, NSIA, Society for International Relations and Awareness, SRIA, Nigerian Election Working Group, NEWG, Women's Research and Documentation Center, WODOC. She consults for a number of national and international agencies and institutions, including the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, NIPS, KURU, Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, Foreign Service Academy, National Defense College, NDC, Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and the Electoral Institute, CEI, Women's Advocate Research and Documentation Center, WRDC, Initiative for Women's Studies in Nigeria, National Democratic Institute, NDI, Action Aid, USAID Nigeria, and the Frederick Ebert Steinfeld. Professor Pogoson was on the Advisory Council of the Ibrahim Index African Governance, IIAG, of the M.O. Ibrahim Foundation, and a member of the Scientific Committee of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, CODISTRIA. She has been a guest lecturer and an external examiner at the University of Lagos, Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, Lagos State University, Olabisi Olabanjo University, Agowe, Covenant University, Ota, Babcock University, Ile-Ife. She's a highly motivated researcher, teacher trainer, administrator, and policy analyst with over 2 decades of experience routing intellectually diverse environments. She derives pleasure in impacting knowledge to others and is committed to utilizing her training in political and gender research and varied consulting experience to strengthen the transformation of women's political participation for socio-political, inclusive growth and sustainable development. She is knowledgeable in conveying and building bottom-up programs, a team leader and member, and skilled communicator with excellent work ethics. Our research interests and international relations, with particular focus on foreign policy analysis, strategic studies, governance, and gender studies. She's a member of a number of learned societies and organizations. She is well published internationally and locally, and has several journal articles, chapters in books, and monographs to her credit. She's widely traveled and has attended numerous international and local conferences. Professor Pogoson is happily married and blessed with children and grandchildren. I present to you Professor Irene Pogoson. Over to you, ma.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this invitation, and it's always a pleasure to have a time out, like I would call it, with the younger ones. And in my topic today is to investigate the prospects of youth and women in Nigeria's contemporary politics. That's the topic I've been given. And I believe that it's a topic that we are all aware of because we all live and breathe and experience politics in diverse ways. But now I'm going to focus mainly on the youth and women and how they interplay with Nigeria's contemporary politics. To start with, I would want us to share these two quotations. The first says, the power of youth is the commonwealth for the entire world. The faces of young people are the faces of our past, our present, and our future. And there's no segment in the society that can match the power and the realism, the enthusiasm and courage of the young people. And I'm sure we all agree with that. As it pertains to women, the quotation I have here says that to attain gender equality and full participation of women in decision-making indicators of democracy. The involvement of women in all aspects of political life produces more equitable societies and also delivers a strong and more representative democracy. And both quotations, I believe, speaks to the essence of inclusive democracy, which is the essence of this conference. And as an introduction, I want to say that if we narrowly define politics, we are referring to activities of governments, of politicians, of political parties, and also of individuals, we the people. And if we broadly define it, we're including the interrelationships between people, between men and women, between parents and children, between the youth and the aged, and the operation of power, the power play at every level of human interaction. And then when we talk about political participation, it includes a wide range of activities, and these activities span through people builds the notion that all citizens, male, female, young, old, boy, child, transgender, whatever gender, should be involved in decision-making processes that affect them. And this includes direct and indirect ways through which people of all ages tend to exercise influence as individuals, influence as members of networks, of associations, of groups, of communities, of institutions, and indeed, doing all of this through various political institutions. Now, some questions that are often asked about politics, about the political highway or the political road, as it were, would be, why the scarcity of youth and female candidates and elected officials? Are they uninterested? Are they unwilling? Are they uncertain? Another question would be, is the political system unresponsive? Is it impenetrable? Is it closed to contain only some particular groups of people? Is the issue that of the driver or the road? Now, the conclusion that one might want to reach is that it is both the driver and the road that matters to any journey. And first and ultimately, the driver's perception of whether he or she will face a smooth road or have faced smooth road conditions, or will it be stop and go traffic, would influence his or her choice to take or avoid a certain road. I'm sure we can all key into that. Likewise, youths and women envisage aspiring to political office, participating in politics, being representatives and all of that, they see all of these as greatly being affected by the cost and benefits of how they participate. The costs and benefits which they anticipate from that highway into politics that they want to traverse. And the political road conditions, unfortunately and sadly, appear to differ for youths and women and older men. Now, ultimately, indeed, we find that ultimately the issue of women and youth in politics have generated much more debate than what I have mentioned and the questions I earlier mentioned. And a greater participation of women and young people in the political life of the country will undoubtedly lead to a stronger, inclusive democracy. You find that a consultative and participative decision-making structure that involves young people, that involves women of all ages, is more than necessary in meeting the varied aspiration of our diverse nations. Unfortunately, both the young ones and women at every socio-political level will find themselves highly underrepresented in the political realm. And besides this, they are far removed from decision-making levels. And this is saying that the political playfield, the political road, the highway in each country, including ours, Nigeria, has its own peculiar characteristics. But one feature common to all of this is that it is uneven and it is not encouraging to youth and women's participation. And so we're saying that politics in many countries today is dominated by elite groups. It's engulfed by their wealth, their privilege, which ensures their path to power is unhindered. And I'm sure we can key into this and understand this even within our current electoral process. The past primaries, for instance, and the ongoing events within the political realm. Now, traditionally, these power structures exclude marginalized people. And when we talk about marginalized people, this includes the youth, the women, people living with disabilities, the vulnerables in all shades and color, who may lack the resources to reach influential positions, who could be actively discriminated against when pursuing their political ambitions. Now, this type of politics is antithetical to inclusive political participation, because inclusive political participation ideally is a fundamental political and democratic right for all. It is crucial to building stable and peaceful societies and developing policies that respond to the specific needs of all citizens, specific needs of all, and not just some citizens. And so an inclusive democracy means that all citizens, male, female, young and old, should feel represented and their voices should be heard. And linked to this will be parity democracy, which implies the equal representation of women and men and young ones in decision-making positions. However, we find that the youth, the women, the minorities, the vulnerable and marginalized groups oftentimes are excluded from mainstream political structures. And this results in a lack of genuine representation in the decision-making process and also impacts on the democratic process at large. Statistics tells us that there are more than 3.5 billion people under the age of 30. That's the youth living in the world today. And indeed, this is the highest number in history. It also tells us that the population of females in the world is about 3.905 billion, which is like half of the world population. But unfortunately, in spite of the size of the demographics, which I have mentioned, the high level of political and social engagement among the youth and the women notwithstanding, they remain one of the most underrepresented groups in politics and public life, globally, nationally as well. Now, there's a significant problem here because given that some of the world's toughest challenges disproportionately affect young people and men, it means that for the political systems which we run to be participatory and to be representative, all parts of the society must be included in this system. And it means also that when the young ones and women are disenfranchised one way or the other, or disengaged from political processes, a significant portion of the population itself has little or no voice. Neither do they have influence in decisions which affect aspects and specific aspects of their lives. And the major consequence and result of this is there's an undermining of political systems' representativeness. Now, specifically, you find that concerning the youth, people under the age of 35 are rarely found in formal political leadership positions. In a third of countries globally speaking, eligibility for the national parliament starts at 25 years or higher, and it is a common practice to refer to politicians as young if they are below 35 to 40 years of age. Now, youths are therefore not adequately represented in formal political institutions and processes such as parliaments, which includes, for instance, our National Assembly, political parties, the electoral process, and indeed public institutions and administrations. Now, the youth is even more, this situation is even more difficult for both young women in particular, okay, as well as women at mid-level and decision-making leadership positions. Now, as it concerns women, therefore, you find that there's a global proportion of women parliamentarians, which stands at only 26.1%. Juxtapose this against the number of women, which I told you are like half of humanity. And this is according to IPU's latest Women in Parliament in its 2001 report. Also, in the 48 countries that had parliamentary elections last year, women candidates won only 28% of the new seats. In most countries, the goal of achieving meaningful gender equality in politics remains elusive. Women cast ballots in equal and even greater numbers than men, but they continue to trail behind men in the political realm. And so what I'm saying is that youth and women are not a minority. They actually represent more than half of humanity, both in quantitative dimension, and they are one of its major components in qualitative dimensions. And from available data from INEC this year, over 75% of registered voters in Nigeria currently are youths and women. That means that they form the largest percentage in the statistics index of INEC. However, the underrepresentation of youths and women constitute a serious democratic deficit, which I have alluded to, and this undermines the legitimacy of contemporary democratic ideal. The disparity which I'm explaining raises fundamental questions of social justice, when you find that young people and women are the majority of the electorate, but they are few of the elected leaders. Indeed, it also has negative effects on future generations because there is an ongoing imbalance in equal opportunities, which can affect and indeed would affect the prospects for both social and economic development in the long run. Now, in terms of youth in politics, there are some major issues which I'd like us to note, which I'm highlighting. First is that young men and young women are indeed resourceful influences, and they are active sources of innovations, particularly in the digital and tech world that we are in now. And throughout history, they have participated, they have contributed, and they have even engendered important changes in political systems, in decision-making dynamics, and in socioeconomic opportunities. And so when they are allowed, when they are permitted, you find that young men and women are traditionally active politically in higher institutions, but often they are disillusioned with political leadership and with political institutions. And you find that they are excluded also from political development. There is strong evidence that the participation of young people in formal institutional political processes is also relatively low when compared to older citizens. And indeed, when you look at the average age of our politicians in Nigeria, you know that there's no gainsaying this. Now, this challenges the representativeness of the political system, and oftentimes it leads to the disenfranchisement of young people. And more, the youth are inclined to participate in informal processes more than formal political and electoral ones. For instance, in activism, in protest, in campaigning, in driving reforms online, particularly the social media. And you will also find in literature that there are some distorting assumptions about young people, about how they participate in political processes. And these are common. And usually these assumptions, wrong assumptions, are triggered by lack of understanding and oftentimes by prejudice. Now, they are inaccurately versions of the character and experiences of most youths. And please note that, like women, the youth do not constitute a homogeneous group. Now, the distorting assumptions can lead to discrimination against the young people. And this, like I said earlier, would negatively affect their capacity, their capability, and their enthusiasm to participate in political processes. Now, some aspects of these negative assumptions about the youth could be, well, somewhat grounded in some versions of reality, but on the whole, they can be pretty misleading. For instance, they are apathetic about and disengaged from politics, and so they don't bother to vote. They lack maturity, they lack experience, and they lack knowledge. And the implication here is that they're not capable or intelligent enough to make informed decisions, such as when voting, and also that they can be easily manipulated. It is also assumed that they are anti-state, in quotes, and so they have a propensity for violence and extremism. But this notwithstanding, it's important for us to note that opportunities for youth to engage in governance, on one hand, to participate in political and decision-making processes largely depends on existing political, socioeconomic, and even cultural context. Because you find in this context, both globally and nationally, there are social norms in many parts of the world and indeed in our nations, diverse nations, that result in multiple and various forms of discrimination against men, youth, and young women in particular. And so you find that in present-day Nigeria, political participation and representation is largely unattainable and inaccessible to Nigerian youths. In spite of the Not Too Young to Run law of 2018, Nigeria's political space is still overtly dominated by the old generation and godfathers. They determine who gets what, when, and how. They favor their bodies, their cronies, to the detriment of many young Nigerians that are willing to participate in politics. And when we say the youths are leaders of tomorrow, you find that this contradicts the leadership monopoly practiced by aging Nigerian rulers. And so leadership is portrayed as the right of the elderly in Nigeria, irrespective of societal changes since independence. Youth, according to YIGA Africa, in Nigeria had the numerical superiority in the 2019 general elections, with 51.11 of the roughly 43 registered voters in the country. But the actual elections itself was a different matter entirely, with only about 46.3% of the total registered youth voters, a figure which added to, well, significantly 19 million. Now, this number, 19 million, was more than half the total voter turnout, which stood at roughly 28.6 million, with the actual youth voting bloc at about 66%. Now, what I'm saying is that in the 2019 general elections, the youth bloc in Nigeria contributed the largest voters. And so, juxtapose this against the picture of the lack of youth representation in leadership roles. Youth representation cuts across about 1%. And with 1% of the leadership positions across all levels and tiers of governance in Nigeria, a worrisome picture is painted for an emerging economy like ours. 1% representation of the most active members of the voting bloc and the majority citizen population makes it unacceptable. And historically, if you look, you find that Nigeria make room for youth Nigeria has always made room for youth representation in governance. Talk about the Ziks of this world, the Awolowos, and so on and so forth. Even President Buhari was a youth when he took over office, when he became the head of state over 30 years ago. But recent decades see a significant shift from that reality. Now, talking about women in politics, what are the major issues? Now, starting from the global and moving on to the local, you find that women's participation in politics, its governance has been lacking behind. And there's been although there has been a steady improvement over the past years. Now, as at last year, September, there were only 26 women serving as heads of states or government in 24 countries, okay? And literature tells us that gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be reached for another 130 years. You have 10 countries with a woman head of state and 13 countries with a woman head of government. 21% of government ministers were women, and only 14 countries have achieved 40% or more women in cabinets. And now with an annual increase of just 0.5 percentage points, we're saying that gender parity in ministerial positions, for instance, will not be achieved before 2027. Only 4 countries have 40% or more of women in parliament in single or lower houses. And this includes Rwanda, that has been the success story, Cuba, Bolivia, and the United Arab Emirates. And globally, there are 27 states in which women account for less than 10% of parliamentarians, and this includes Nigeria. And so at the current rate of progress, gender parity in national legislative bodies will not be achieved before 2063. In terms of women in politics, since our venture into democracy in 1999, the Fourth Republic, when Nigeria returned to civil rule, the country has conducted 6 general elections, of which the record of women political representation has been somehow minimal, marginal, and indeed poor. 7% of women representation was in the lower house was recorded in 2007. In 2003, we had, and 2019 and 2003, we had 3.7% and 4.9%. So the 7% in 2007 was applauded. However, the figures declined to 68.8% and 59.6% in 2011 and 2015. And as at now, we have 6% in the National Assembly in Nigeria, about 6%. Only 7 senators, 22 House of Rep members, and this is far below the global average of 22%, the African average of 23.4%, and even the West African sub-region average of 15%. So what I'm saying is that there's been a lack of progress in terms of women's political representation in Nigeria. And of course, if we consider the role women play in our socio-economic and cultural landscape, this is not acceptable. And the expectation is that the increasing role of women in society should translate to greater inclusion of women in political processes. Now, this is not to be, and I'm taking my cue from the decisions of the National Assembly to reject the proposed 5 gender bills in March 2022. The gender bill sought to promote more opportunities for women in political parties, in governance, and the society at large. Also, before this, in December of 2021, the Nigerian Senate rejected for the second time the Gender Equality Opportunities Bill, which was designed to secure the rights of women and girls in the country. And so Nigeria is far from being a gender equal society. There are various obstacles to the political participation of women and youth in Nigeria. And these obstacles span from formal institutionalized political processes where women feel rapidly disempowered and annihilated, to socio-cultural obstacles, to psychological, motivational barriers, okay? And you find that the obstacles to youth political participation therefore occur at different levels and in different areas. Like I said earlier, they are structural, they are individual, they are also organizational, they are cultural as well. And in terms of the youth participation in politics, a few of the hindrances at the structural level includes money politics, the increased cost for politicking in Nigeria, embarrassingly out of reach of the average Nigerian, not to talk of the youth, social and cultural traditions, which indeed it portends that that politics has been a domain of older and often male and wealthy citizens, and the youth are alienated. And indeed, young women in this realm are often subjected to what I call double discrimination. First, discriminated on account of their age, and also on account of their gender. At the individual level, there are some obstacles also that hinder youth and youth political participation. Distrust in the political institutions itself, understandably so, lack of access to knowledge about political processes, which is telling on the country itself and the process itself, okay? Poor quality voter education and enlightenment, particularly, social and economic exclusion and marginalization. Look, it's difficult to find a sustainable job. The daily struggle for many people in Nigeria, in all parts of the country, is real. They can hardly cope with precarious working conditions. And so venturing into politics in that realm is indeed, I would say, a mission impossible. Now, in terms of women, obstacle to women's political participation, they are more or less the same as what I have just enumerated. And so you find that throughout the electoral cycle, women, like the youth, contend with many barriers, structural, institutional, and individual. And some of them are the traditional gender roles and gender-based stereotypes, the male-dominated model of politics, lack of party support, exclusion from decision-making structures, the perception by women themselves, or some women, that politics is dirty, violence from within and from outside political parties, lack of political experience, even family voting and pressure from families sometimes and communities on the exercise of women's political rights. So these are some of the obstacles. But having identified them, what are the way forward? I believe that the development of Nigeria is truly in the hands of the young and the active. That means the youth and women as well. The country as we know it is riddled with insecurities, with poverty, economic degeneration, and political instability. Vote buying is the order of the day, electoral malpractices, and other corrupt activities adversely affect the integrity of most elections in the country. I'm not saying anything new. Also, Nigerians do not vote because they simply see no reason to do so. And the few that do are affected by the current situation of voting for the candidates who probably talks a lot, who bluffs a lot, or who spends the most. In fact, the spending part of it more than all the others. Now, this is a deplorable situation. And I believe that it is a wake-up call from oblivion for Nigerian youth and women, that they need to harness their population advantage, their demographic advantage, to demand for a change with an inclusion in the nation's political system. Democratization, as we all know, is not a linear process. It's continuous. It requires support. It requires development. And so to respond to the needs of the youth and women and to guarantee their basic human rights are recognized and should be enforced. Their active and meaningful participation in society, in democratic practices and processes is therefore important. And what I'm saying is that meaningful participation and leadership require that young people and women have opportunities, capacities, and they must benefit from an enabling environment and relevant evidence-based programs and policies at all levels, okay? And if Nigerian women are to make a case and the youth in 2023, for instance, they should look beyond getting just getting their PVCs and simply voting, but to vote intentionally, that is to vote right. The youth and the female population in Nigeria must present themselves as a force to be reckoned with in the 2023 elections by doing what? Being political active, raising and supporting candidates with people-driven policies, and with uncompromised prospects for good governance. Who they are is the question. Being resilient, they should also be resilient in demanding a change of government with their votes and actively participate in the 2023 election poll. Now, like I've said earlier, we have a bulk of the voting number resting on the hands of youth and women. And so the focus to me should shift away from voting for the candidates who has all the money to spend on finding candidates with people with focused policies and who have plans for inclusion. Beyond voting, I'm saying that there's need to enforce public accountability, something sorely lacking in today's politics. And when you have the bulk of the voting power, you're meant to recognize your role as the arbiter of impunity from elected officers. And so the youth must begin to show more interest in politics. Their work is actually crucial to addressing the democratic experience of Nigeria. Their ideas and approaches may differ from expected practices, but they are usually dedicated to supporting democracy. And so approaches to democratic improvement in Nigeria should draw on the undervalued potential which is embedded within the young people's democratic spirit. With 19 million voters in 2019, like I said earlier, Nigerian youths have the majority say in who wins or who loses elections in Nigeria. Buhari won the 2019 elections with about 19 million votes. Consider this against the 19 million Nigerian youths that actually voted in that elections. Now, moving forward for women, the extent to which women can register to vote, stand as candidates, cast the vote, and take part in the highest level of decision-making all represent an indicator of an inclusive democracy, as with the youth. The more women who participate as voters, as candidates, as political party leaders, electoral administration staff, and so on and so forth, the more accepted their place in politics becomes. And so I'm saying that there is great prospects for improved governance, and that Nigerian youth and women must wake up to take charge of their political destiny. They must permeate the nooks and crannies of politics and decision-making and participate actively in politics. We must support political parties that have different ideologies, okay, to those of the past, support credible candidates, and such create an enabling environment for political and economic growth. It finds that stakeholders have critical roles to play in enhancing youth's and women's political representation in society, all stakeholders. First, also, apart from the individuals themselves, the political parties should adopt and implement party-specific youth gender quotas, informal targets, and other positive action mechanisms at all levels of office, including for internal party positions. For civil society groups, they should conduct information and awareness raising campaigns to encourage youth and women to stand for election. They are actually doing this. And in running capacity building programs to support them in this process. Now, these actors can contribute to developing the skills, experience, knowledge, and resources of youths and women in the pipeline for elected office and once they enter. And now finally, there are lots of opportunities for youths and women inclusion in Nigerian politics, and that's what I'm saying. I'm also saying that the resurgence is around the corner. It is in our hands. The youth and women must leverage on the political and economic powers which they wield, even the social powers as well. The NSAS 2020 protest organized and managed by Nigerian youth against police brutality is a major pointer to the power of a focused, passionate, and charged youth bloc and what they can do to engender change in the political realm. Also, the March 2022 protest by hundreds of Nigerian women across the nation against the rejection of the 5 gender bills that guaranteed increased gender equality is also a pointer of what an active collection of youth and women can achieve. And so today I see thousands of young heroes and heroines, Fumilayo Ransom Kutis, Margaret Echoes, Gambo Sawabas, Dora Quinleys, Antonio Nahoros, Michael Imodus, I hope you guys know these names, Aminu Kanos, Nnamdi Azikiwe's, and Obafemi Awolowo was marching forward in the political realm, on the political highway, and emerging in the call for a new Nigeria. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ma, for that session. We are so grateful, Ma. Thank you for charging us with the youth and women on this platform to take the condition and our destiny into our hands and go there and participate in Nigerian contemporary politics so that we can have that inclusive governance and democracy that we hope to see in the future. We'll quickly have a question and answer session. Because of time, we'll take only be entertaining just 3 questions. So if you have any questions to ask our speaker, you can just unmute yourself and speak.
Any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you, Ma, for that wonderful session. And it was really an eye-opening one. And you got my attention with the position that youth are the major voters in Nigeria. I'm just hearing of that. though I was expecting, like my prediction is that maybe most of the youth are in the north. I don't understand, because we had youth presidential aspirants then that are supposed to emerge as winners during the election, but God knows it all. My question is there a way to unify our voting bloc, that is the youth, so that maybe our preferred candidates can win elections? Do you have suggestions for us? Maybe things we can do to unify the youth, to have a common ground, to have common say, because only when the youth are united, that's the only time they can effect a change. So we like your motherly advice, ma. And also, I observed that on the social media and even other platforms, the youth are getting really frustrated. I can't use the word give up. Let me say they're about to give up. Some are already hopeless. They believe the country can't get better. They believe we can't get leadership rights in Nigeria. Some don't even know the roles they are expected to play. And there is something called propaganda. Our youth, they don't use I don't know how to put it. They are not thinking again. When we see anything on social media, we just want to believe. I don't know the advice you can give us as a mother for the youth, so as to reinforce our belief in Nigeria, reinforce our belief in the electoral process. So this is my question, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. 2 questions. Can we just take all the questions if there are any more? Okay. So that's the first one, how to unify the youth within a voting bloc, and how to make the best of the social media, as it were. Yes? And we have any more?
Yeah, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Exactly.
Salah Ibrahim Ajishola is my name. Thanks for the wonderful lecture you have given to us. Quickly, my perspective through which I want to ask the question is pertaining to the youth, the male in particular. My emphasis on the issue of youth involvement in government. I want to use Oyo State, where I belong presently, as a yardstick. That what we are experiencing from the fewer youths that are involved in the ongoing government is even a little bit not on comparative level with those tabas, quote and unquote, that we are being disappointed with the way youth that are involved are also at least devising the mechanism aim at promoting good governance. So my emphasis is, even if we come to gaining that particular yearning that youth participation is important in our political activities, how sure are we that these youth that are already being starved with abject poverty can still take the country to the promised land? That is number one. Then 2, for my findings, I come to know that the expression of where you sit belong to the where you sit will determine your contribution or your action and inaction. I believe that those youth that are involved in politics now, they are not being objective in terms of promoting or propagating good governance. By the time you look at their profile, you will see that because they belong to one party, they are gaining financial means from one party. That is the essence of supporting the candidate there. So, and this is overall a product of a poverty online. What do you think, from your wealth of experience, can be the solution to this? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Then I give my answer.
Good afternoon, man. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I would like to ask a question from the perspective of youths in the diaspora, because one of the things I've observed personally is that youths, a category of youths, when they were in Nigeria, they seem to be very enthusiastic about issues of governance, issues of democracy in the country. And then once they get the opportunity to leave the country and experience how democracy actually functions in the globalized world, this feeling of hopelessness this feeling of wanting to save myself first and then wanting to rush to get probably permanent citizenship or and whatnot, just to escape the Nigerian narrative. That kind of feeling comes up. And I, for instance, living here in Germany, and I try to follow a lot of news from Nigeria, and it's sometimes gets scary to discover that most of the news coming from the country are usually news about one attack somewhere, this, that. I mean, mostly terrible news. So my question then has to go with the fact that how do we address this issue of Nigeria continuing to lose its youth to developed countries? We continue. These developed countries have a lot of scholarship, a lot of wonderful opportunities through which they woo the active youth who would have otherwise been able to positively contribute to the development of their country. And when these youths themselves, by the time they are exposed to better lives in these countries, it becomes almost easy to just give up on their country. So how do we address these issues? How do we improve on the interest of youth in wanting to positively impact on the trajectory of governance and development in the country? Thank you.
Okay, so let me give my answers to these three questions, which all focus on the youth. And no questions on the women. I guess maybe, are there no young women on this platform? No women on the platform. Anyway, first is to say, yes, the youth are the majority voters in Nigeria, going by data from INEC. And so that shows the power that the youth has if properly channeled. Now, the others, remember I said that when we talk about the youth, they are not homogeneous. So what quality, caliber, type of youth are we talking about? Who are those ones that are truly and genuinely involved in engendering the change that will turn the country around, such that, as the last speaker said, we will not have this migration of the youth out of the country to the detriment of the nation itself? And I think one of a few, I would mention two avenues to achieve, okay, a unifying vote is through enlightenment. We need to have greater voter and civic education, targeting the youth on one hand. We need to have the trainings, capacity buildings, programs for youth who are interested not only in running for office, but in the political process itself. And that's why in my presentation, I mentioned the various stakeholders. So all the stakeholders, including government itself, has different roles to play. How do we, like we say in the gender world, create a movement that will involve the articulate youth demographics, not the youth population that we are told have been voting in the North, okay, but those who are aware and need a change. So first is through the civil society, through government, through the various stakeholders, INEC, targeting programs at encouraging the youth to see the way forward. And this entails a lot of spending of money first. And then the other is the youth themselves. They need to be aware, to read more, to learn more, to engage more, okay? The last speaker talked about citizens' participation. That's what we're saying. We should not be aloof. We should not think it is us against them or it is for them. So both the various stakeholders and the youth themselves need to engage in different ways to ensure that we have a unified. Can we unify to vote? Because at the end of it, voting becomes largely subjective. That's another question, and not the issue for now. So I'm questioning, as it were, that narrative of a unified bloc, but drawing attention to the power in which is embedded within the possibility of that unified bloc when it comes to voting. Now, the social media, the good, the bad, and the ugly is embedded in the social media. And what we take of it from it and what we make of it largely depends on us as well. So it's a very fertile ground for information gathering, for even activism. At least we have been told now that Peter Obi is largely embedded in the social media, in his politicking. And many others, Showere, all of them, somebody mentioned some youth, Duro Toye, the last elections, quite a number of them. So yes, the social media is there, but it is now left to us to make the best use of it. Nobody can tell us what to do, except we engage it positively. So it's positive engagement with the social media. And then the youth involvement in government also largely and sadly depends on government itself. To what extent do they want to accommodate, allow, empower the youth to be part of the political system? And then without role models, how else do you encourage the others? Until we can point out, and indeed we can. There are quite a number, maybe not in your state, but I do know that there are some youthful Nigerians in government, in the Oyo State cabinet, maybe not as young as we would expect, that we can talk about. And offhand, I can't remember, but I remember having a conversation, I think sometimes with Professor Ayede, and he mentioned somebody within the Oyo State cabinet, okay, who is relatively younger than this aged politician. So that's it. A lot depends on government expanding the political space and allowing the youth to come in. And then the youth in diaspora. Even for me, I have 3 children. 2 out of them are out of Nigeria, and they're doing well. We will continue to lose our youth to the Western world, even non-Western world, where they think the grass is greener. Why? Because the Nigerian environment is hostile to youth, to women, hostile to everybody. And that is why we need to engender good governance, a governance that is all inclusive and all accommodating, that would not allow ASU to go on strike for 6 months and still be napping. That would not allow the dollar to depreciate to 710 naira as at today, if it is true. That would not allow electricity to be a challenge in 2022, and so on and so forth. So dangerous migrations of the youth out of Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. So we have learned, and I guess for each and every one of us, we need to take that mandate and reach out to people in our local communities, in our network of friends, and ensure that we go out and talk to people to ensure that we have the direct of enlightening people. It's very, very key for us to do that. So I'm going to appreciate every one of us for taking out their time to join the meeting. We are so grateful, and we'll be closing up around the now. Just to round up, I'll end up and close the meeting for us. Over to you, Larry.
Okay, I want to express, on behalf of ApexGuide Development Center, I want to express our profound gratitude to our speakers today who have taken their time to be here with us. We've had 2 amazing sessions, and I believe that we have all been impacted in one way or the other. The conference continues tomorrow by 11 a.m. Nigerian time, and we encourage everyone to please be part of us. And you can also share the Zoom link with friends and families who would definitely also benefit from the program. So once again, thank you. We are happy to have you and see you tomorrow.
Thank you. I'm glad to have been here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, and all the best tomorrow.